Good evening, everyone, and welcome to week 7 of Great Decisions 2024 at Manitowoc Public Library. Tonight we will be exploring Understanding Indonesia with Dr. Eunsook Jung, who will be giving our lecture this evening. But as always, before I dive into the lecture and introduce our speaker, just wanted to make a couple of announcements. As always, I wanted to thank our series sponsors. So a big thank you to the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County, the Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, and the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So a huge thank you to these sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to present the full 8 weeks and have such great speakers at our lecture. One thing on that topic is the Great Decisions Legacy Fund. If you're interested in donating to the Great Decisions Legacy Fund so that hopefully one day we can become self-sufficient and not have to rely on sponsorships, not that we don't love our sponsors, but if we could become self-sufficient, that would be even better. If you're interested in donating to the Legacy Fund, please grab one of these pamphlets, which are downstairs at the library, and right on the back it can tell you how you can donate. So just wanted to mention that. Then before we dive into our lecture this evening, I just wanted to remind you about an upcoming program that we have. It is coming up a week from this Wednesday. It is going to be presented by Wisconsin Elections Commission Administrator Megan Wolf. She will be at the library from 6 to 7:45 on Wednesday, March 27th. And what she will be discussing is you can trust Wisconsin's election system. This is a purely informative program for anyone who is concerned that this might be political. It is 100% informative, and she's going to be talking about what sets us apart from other state systems to deliver accurate and fair results. So with the election coming up, the elections, I should say, coming up, it's a very important topic to get accurate information about. So that is next Wednesday, March 27th, from 6 to 7:45 p.m. in the Balkansky Community Room. And that was my plug for an upcoming program. And just so you know, during the lecture tonight, during Understanding Indonesia, if you have any questions, just type them into the comments box on either YouTube or Facebook, and we will get to them at the end of the lecture. But for right now, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. She is a first-time speaker at Manitowoc Public Library's Great Decisions. So welcome. Welcome, Dr. Jung, and
Thank you.
let me just tell everyone about you and make your picture much bigger than mine. Dr. Eunsook Jung is an assistant dean in the College of Letters and Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Prior to this position, she was a faculty associate in the Department of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She served as the chair of Southeast Asian Council for the Association of Asian Studies from 2022 to 2024. Her research interests lie in the field of comparative politics and include Islam and politics, religion and politics, social movements, politics of Indonesia, and politics of Korea. She received her PhD from the Department of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2009. Her publications have appeared on Asian Survey, Contemporary Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia Research, Asian Journal of Social Science, and in other outlets. So, without further ado, I'm going to take myself out of the picture and bring up Dr. Jung's presentation for the evening, and we'll get going. So let me disappear, and I turn it over to you, Dr. Jung.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to speak to the audience about Indonesia and Indonesian foreign policy. I just came back from a conference where I could communicate with a lot of scholars that was working on Indonesian politics. So I'll be happy to bring different perspectives that I just learned from the conference as well. I know you might wonder, I'm actually originally from South Korea. I started to be interested in Indonesia when I was in university. I went to Indonesia for 6 months as an exchange student, and I became interested in Indonesia. I did a master degree in Southeast Asian studies, and after that, working in Thailand, I wanted to pursue little more studies on Southeast Asia. So I came to Wisconsin and did comparative politics. So Indonesia, since 1995, has been most interesting country to me. So I'm happy to share with you what I know. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. It would be great to learn from audience what you're interested in, what you are curious about, and any discussion points. So next slide, please.
Oh, excuse me.
And thank you so much for Manitowoc Library for inviting me. This is a great way to talk about these important issues with a lot of people. So I really appreciate it. So just give you a little background about Indonesia. Many of you might know the world fourth largest country of their population is really high, right? And third largest democracy. So Indonesia democratized in 1998, and first election after democratization was in 1999. And also, it's a home to world largest Muslim population. Often, when we talk about Islam, we turn to the Middle East for Islamic practices. But actually, Indonesia is the largest Islamic country or largest country with the largest Muslim population. So, next slide. Um, and you can see Indonesia consists of lots of islands. It's about 17,000 islands. So it's coming from all the way to Banda Aceh on the left and all the way to the West Papua. It could take almost more than like 10 hours to get to one by flight, get to one place to another. And each place has a different languages, as well as different ethnic groups, different cultures, and so it's very hard to describe Indonesia as one word or one culture. So importance of Indonesia is more of diversity than anything else because it is such a diverse group of people that are together. So next slide, please. So we're going to dive into the most important issue here. I think it has been a big discussion at the conference that I was just in as well. And we know that China and US are wooing Indonesia. And this is one of the title from actually journal article, but Beijing has the edge. It seems to agree, everybody seems to agree that actually the Beijing has an edge. And we will see later in our evidence that China has become Indonesia's top economic partner under President Joko Widodo. President Joko Widodo, in your picture, in your right, one left in Xi Jinping, right is in Joko Widodo. He's the outgoing president because we just had an election on February 14th, 2024. So I will talk about newly elected president later and what will be implications of foreign policy when the new president is elected. But Joko Widodo was elected in 2014. He was actually he was a businessman. He run the furniture company. He made his own company in a small city called Solo, and he got really successful. He becomes a Solo mayor. He did get rid of a lot of crimes. He also studied lots of reforms and social welfare systems. And with his popularity, he becomes the Jakarta governor. And after Jakarta governor, with a very popular, like huge popularity, and he became the president of Indonesia. So he's been actually very unique background as a president. It was nor military, because often military people will get into become a president. So he wasn't military. He wasn't coming from big money like conglomerates or the oligarch. So he was a kind of unique person in terms of his background. So see, how did then, right? How and why that Indonesia become little the closer to Indonesia, because they do have a troubled history between Indonesia and China. So let's go back and see one by one. So next slide, please. So excuse me. So it is basically, if I have to sort of narrow down what it is about, is a mutual interest between China and Indonesia. So from the start of his presidency, Mr. Joko Widodo made an infrastructure a recurring theme of his tenure. And Mr. Xi Jinping had made an infrastructure investment a backbone of his diplomatic strategy. So you have seen China's Belt and Road Initiative that go around all the way to different parts of Asia. And he's building trains or like pipelines. And as a part of that initiative, China invested a lot of money in Indonesia. And Indonesia, this president, Joko Widodo, he himself made his own legacy as the sort of another father of development. So he built he built the railroad. He also allowed the speed train to develop and in place. The road were Indonesia. I don't know if any of you have been to Indonesia. Road conditions were not really great. Places that you go, it could take like 8-10 hours. So places like, if I go to the places used to take Jakarta, for example, like 8 hours, now it takes about less than 6 hours to get to the same place due to improved road condition. So the mutual interest about economic development that in China that willing to actually support Indonesia on this aspect made China and Indonesia very close, which makes the Indonesia's relationship with America less close, less friendly. Next slide, please. So this strategic battle between the United States and China for influence in Asia. So there's definitely there's a battle between United States and China with the war that's going on Ukraine. There's also Xi Jinping's sort of ambition to govern rest of the Asia. All these things makes the situation a little more tricky. So China is Indonesia's largest trading partner, has built a high-profile infrastructure there, and is a major investor in its nickel industry, which is one of the very highly sought after natural resources. And this is an industry that's central to Indonesia's future economic plans. And also, China has delivered sizable investment to win over worried populace in Indonesia, pouring billions of dollars into developing the world's biggest nickel deposits and expediting shipment of COVID-19 vaccines at a critical time It has been a major partner in the country's infrastructure push, including a building very high-speed train. Um, Although it took a while, it's taking a long time and over budget. And I mean, there's issues of who owns what kind of issues, but um, China played a very significant role, and there's no doubt about it. And when you go to Indonesia, you will see there's now trains, lots of trains for the short distance, long distance, and so forth. It has been really developing. And Indonesia is a country that used the Chinese vaccine Sinovac um, the most for their population. So other than China, Indonesia is the second country that uses Sinovac for their vaccination, and that much that they were very close and rely on each other for not only economic issues but these kind of social policies. Next slide, please. So this just give you a number. Is a trade volume is about US dollars is 1 million, and partner share is about is a percentage. So exporter for Indonesia's export goes to actually China. You can see that's like 28.66. And Singapore is about 7.88, so it's like the $15,452 million. And Japan, very close to Singapore and Japan, is about 7.46. And you will see United States is actually lower, and $11,309 million, and it's about like a 5.76. Malaysia is $9,451 million, and that's about 4.82. So you could see that China's position in terms of Indonesia's economy, China is the biggest partner to Indonesia. This is kind of, I would say, very unique in a way that if you look at other Asian countries, to see that Indonesia is very close to China. And when we go over the history, you would understand that why this is a little more surprising. Later, I will explain a little more about it because of the troubled relationship between Indonesia and China. That you don't expect that there will be friends, but right now they're actually friends. Used to be they were enemy. So next slide, please. And this is Indonesia's top five exports and import partners. So export and import consider China still 23.23%. United States import and export. So still for import, we do Indonesia imports a lot from United States. So it might be actually a good market for it. 11.15. Japan 7.71. India 5.74. Malaysia 5.19. So you could see that about similar countries. New country here is gonna be India, given the partnership, right, between Pacific Indian Ocean partnership. The India is also one of the rising country in the region. So next, please. So if you look at this is where the China has their industries or the power project. So number one is in Batang Toru hydropower project. And again, this is not only thing. If we just detour to Mekong River, in where the Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia share the Mekong, and a lot of hydropower project there is actually also run by China. And China produces a lot of electricity for economic development for those regions, but at the same time, there are issues of environmental issues and displacement issues, and so that's another topic. But also, Jakarta Bandung high speed rail project. So train line from Jakarta to Bandung is number 2. So Bandung is takes about, when you drive, like 3-4 hours by, but now if we take a train, it will take a lot shorter time. And initially, Bandung is a little bit elevated than Jakarta, so they say that it's impossible to make trains, but they're actually working on it, and I believe their high speed train is actually going. And also there's a power station in Cirebon is number 3, and also number 4 there's another project that going on in Sulawesi Island. So China's investment is all over Indonesia. Of course, ownership and how they divide the benefit, how Indonesia going to pay back to China for initial investment, all those are the questions in the end that they need to sort out. But at least these are the kind of projects that you will see that what China does. And as you can see, on the other hand, U.S. does not really have these kind of projects for Indonesia. Next slide, please. So, excuse me. So if you compare former level of partnership with the China only, is a comprehensive strategic partnership is there. Number of high-level visits, China, like 17, U.S., like 7, that's between 2017 and 2022. Chinese FDI is 27.5 billion. In bilateral trade, you could see China between Indonesia is 73.4 billion. For Indonesia and US is a 27.19 billion. So it's basically almost like not even like not quite 1/3, but it's a more than quarter that their bilateral trade, the difference is actually very visible. Arm trade. So with China, there are 269 million. For US is 946 million. So definitely arms trade are the most important aspect for US investment in Indonesia. But you could see that more of trade perspective, China is the one that will pay more attention to. Next slide, please. So just give you, before I go on, initially I thought about talking more about relationship between Indonesia and US, and then digging up all the documents and what's been published, I realized that actually in US, Indonesia wasn't that important ally, or so-called invisible Indonesia. So it seems that Indonesia has not been that visible to U.S. interest. And for that reason, at least last decade, you will see more of China's prominence in dealing with the Indonesia, rather than U.S.'s hegemony or supremacy in the region. So if you look at Indonesia and China's relationship, right? Indonesia's relations with China have swung sharply during the last 70 years, veering from close allies from 1950s and 1965. So you can imagine relationship between US and Indonesia is opposite of the relationship between Indonesia and China. So if China was a good ally from 1950s, to 1965, relationship between Indonesia and U.S. was a little not going well, very tense, very tense. From 1966 to 1990, relationship between Indonesia to China was really bad. That basically the Suharto came to power, eliminating communists. So Suharto took very close relationship with the United States from 1966 to 1990, and to the distant associates from 1990 2014 are sort of like Indonesia uh, became democratized in 1999, going through elections and going through democratization. Indonesia rose as a leadership in the region, so they focus more on ASEAN from 1990 to 2014. They didn't take a really close relationship with China nor with the United States. So that will call it distant associates. They bring them for APEC or other international trade organizations, but they won't really. But to current close partnership from 2014 to about this point 2024. And that's the when President Joko Widodo was elected as the president. And for 10 years, 2 terms are the limit, maximum limit constitutionally. So anyone who served twice cannot serve anymore. So this election was one of the most important election because they're going to have a new president. So later we'll talk a little bit more about what's the new president look like in terms of foreign policy. Next slide, please. So Indonesia, although Indonesia might have been very invisible to United States, and Indonesia might not have been a very rich country in terms of their GDP or GMP, but Indonesia is known for very strong, principled foreign policy, and which is very different from many other small countries that did not have foreign policy other than taking side with great powers. So their foreign policy principles are the independent and active foreign policy, and active and bebas they call it. And this is the principal policy that was carried out from the very beginning of Indonesia, Republic of Indonesia up until now. So if you look at it, these principles are the foundation of Indonesia's foreign policy, which is independent, right, bebas, and active. In Indonesia also like active. The policy is independent because Indonesia does not side with the world powers. And again, then you will say, oh, why does he then now side with the China? They're not fully side with China. They also side with Indonesia, U.S., but they are known for doing their independent foreign policy. And also, Indonesia's foreign policy is very active to the extent that Indonesia does not maintain a passive or reactive stand on international issues. So later we'll see, they're independently speak of what's going on in the world, however sensitive that might be. They're less afraid of other opinions and seeks active participation in their settlement. In other words, Indonesia's independent and active policy is not neutral policy, but it is one that does not align Indonesia with the superpowers, nor does it blind the country to any military pact. Essentially, it's a policy designed to serve the national interest while simultaneously allowing Indonesia to cooperate with other nations to abolish colonialism, imperialism in all their forms and manifestations for the sake of world peace and social justice. And this explains why Indonesia was one of the founding members of the non-aligned movement. Um, so here, one of the keyword will be non-aligned movement. Next slide will tell you a little bit more about it. So next slide, please. So non-aligned movement, I don't know, some of you or many of you might already know, uh, Sukarno organized Bandung conference in Bandung, in the city. If when you visit Bandung, you will see Asian African Museum where the Bandung conference was held. This is a non-alignment movement, was the 1955 Bandung conference, a conference of Asian African states hosted by Indonesian President Sukarno, who gave a significant boost to promote this movement. His idea is that when these countries aligned with either back then Soviet Union and United States, their voices will not be heard. Instead, they should actually take their own stand, and be independent from United States or no or from Soviet Union, and which makes their position stronger because they're not just aligning with the superpowers automatically. So he's the one of the figure that that began the non-aligned movement, and because of this movement, he was the pain in the neck to US, and also pain in the neck to Soviet Union. And also, this is a sort of beginning of like third world movement or third worldism, that they're not a first country, they're not a second like communists, but they are the people or countries that are neither these two. And what that does is that it gives them empower themselves, although they might be poor, they might not have a much of resources, but still they can have their voices. And this is a time that they were really close to actually United States. And Sukarno had had a tendency of being closer to communist groups, and in domestic politics. Next slide, please. But then Suharto, when Suharto came to power, it was different. Suharto was the one that he was a general, and Suharto came to power by getting rid of alleged communists, because alleged communists are trying to kill Indonesians, or Indonesian tried to actually do the coup. So based on the coup, alleged coup, they killed the communists. But when they killed the communists, a lot of ethnic Chinese, the Chinese people who lived in Indonesia, were killed. And not only ethnic Chinese, but also anyone who's against the Suharto's instruction were killed under the name of communists. During the Suharto regime, um, Suharto took very close relationship with U.S. And because Suharto's regime began with the killing of a lot of Indonesians, it actually did not have a very good relationship with China. So during the Suharto, who was a dictatorship, everything to do with China or Chinese were totally forbidden during his period, throughout the Suharto period. Indonesia froze diplomatic relations with China between 1968 and 1990, and did not even allow Chinese scripts on ketchup bottles coming to Indonesia, or let alone anything. There's no Chinese letters were allowed at all. Chinese education, Chinese tutoring, anything like that. So, Economic Review, the magazines, even Traveler's Tale, the Chinese characters need to be absolutely blackened. So that was totally banned, and Indonesia's only normalized relationship again with China in 1990. So Suharto's relationship and received a lot of foreign aid from United States during that time as a person that who is a of um, defender of capitalism and U.S. allies. So if you actually look at the next slide, this is the actual time. It was if you I don't know whether you can read. This says Indonesia that lead the Indonesia colon the land the communists lost. So General Suharto. So this is the one that time like front cover. Suharto made it, and this is the time that Indonesia became little more visible to United States, because United States with the Vietnam War, also all this in there's a lot of resurgencies in Philippines in 1960s, and also Thailand communist insurgencies. uh, United States was very worried about the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, and with India also taking side with the Soviet Union back then, it is very important for United States to have Indonesia on its side as the defender against the communists. And that way, if Indonesia were to give in to communism, then the Soviet Union's power can come up all the way up to uh, mainland Southeast Asia, which is Thailand, also like which will makes the Soviet Union more powerful, because Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia is still under the communist regime, and so at the time, this is a very, very, very sensitive and important issue. So here's a here's a brief time that U.S. and Indonesia were very close, but again, it doesn't seem to last. Next slide, please. So now we sort of after that, I guess I should have put back to Jokowi that who got the position. So let me just maybe have you give you a little background. So Suharto stepped down amid economic crisis. I don't know whether you remember 1997 and 1998 Asian crisis. When I was in Indonesia at the time, there was like 2,500 rupiah was against the US $1. Overnight, it became 10,000 rupiah against the $1. And a lot of investors were just leaving the country. Everything was collapsing. And because of very sudden exchange rate plummeting down, a lot of investors took money out of the bank, left the country. There was not enough money to import anything. So for example, there was no baby food that it was imported. There's not enough food, not enough oil. And given that economic crisis, the Suharto had to step down, and that's the time that actually that close relationship between U.S. and Suharto was falling apart. And with a condition of IMF, the Suharto stepped down. There was Indonesia sort of Indonesia go into democratization, but from the three presidency, so Abdul Rahman Wahid, Megawati Sukarno Putri, and also SBA Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, the three presidency, there was not much of distinctive foreign policy per se. Of course, they maintained the idea of active and independent policy, but as you recall, one of the slide I talk about at the time was more of the distant allies. They're not in too much in their involved, but not that disengaged. So that's the sort of time. But things change under Joko Widodo presidency when he started to take a really close relationship with China, and he visited China, he hosted China. So from 2014 to 2024, up until now, Joko Widodo has been more of the China leaning rather than America leaning. But as I mentioned earlier, on February 14, 2024, so this year, just we got a new president whose name is Prabowo Subianto. He's Indonesia's new president. I don't know any of you actually remember him, but he was Suharto, the President Suharto's former son-in-law. And Prabowo Subianto was the general army commander that who instructed to kill student activists and abducted the activists who were fighting against the Suharto's dictatorship. So he is known for his human rights violations, and he's discharged from military at that time. He self-exiled, I think, in Jordan for a while, and then he came back. But he is the third time contender to presidency, and this time it worked out. So basically, he's the Prabowo Subianto, who was the minister of defense, used to be the army commander, husband of Suharto's former husband of Suharto's daughter. He, after the self-exile, he came back to Indonesia. He made his own political party called Greater Indonesia Movement. And when he made that party, he was not that popular. And he ran for a presidential election in 2014. Didn't work out. Joko Widodo won. 2019, he ran again, but it didn't work out. This time, he ran with, usually they have to appoint their vice president when they run. So he appointed Joko Widodo's son as his partner, vice presidency, and Prabowo finally won the election after all. I mean, he's from elite family, but he's known to be very temperamental. And, he had a troubled past as a human right violator. And I don't know whether he's still banned, but U.S. actually banned his entry to United States, given his troubled human rights record. And so views are divided. Some people think that because he's coming from Suharto era, when U.S. was the ally to Indonesia, maybe he will maintain the U.S. allies role better. And some people will argue that he's more like, he want to be his own kind of leader, strong leader, just like Xi Jinping and like maybe Putin like. So who knows which way he will go. Next slide, please. So what do we expect from Prabowo's presidency? Because so far we've seen Indonesia's history. There was a time that Indonesia was closer to China, and then closer to United States, and then neither of those countries, and then they back to China. Now, now what? Prabowo's rise to the presidency would likely to bring a mix of continuity and change in Indonesia's foreign policy approach relative to Jokowi's decade in power. More of the public focus will be in continuity, especially how Prabowo, how the Prabowo choose the his vice president was the Jokowi's son. Sorry about the actually chopped sentence there, so I apologize. But the idea is that some people will argue that, well, even if Prabowo might have his own way of thinking about it, he actually won the election because of Joko Widodo, whose popularity, whose legitimacy was really high, and by appointing his son as a vice president, he actually had a blessing from Joko Widodo for his winning. Does he mean that he's going to carry Joko Widodo's legacy, which is more closer to, like his legacy, which is economic development, infrastructure development. He promised that he wants to have, he ran for advancing Indonesia, Maju Indonesia. He claimed, he actually said that he will make the 7% economic development every year. So one of the he's and also he promised the free food for kids as well, school children. All that promises gearing towards economic development, which means that those economic development cannot be done without Chinese help. That means, will he continue the previous legacy of being close to China? Uh, um, like, will they continue that legacy, or will we see something different? Next slide, please. So it's I would say it's kind of mixed. They might see some continuity in some sense, because because the reason that Joko was very popular was because he was successful in making economic development, infrastructure improvement, and all these things, and social, like he did also healthcare. So all these aspects, like free healthcare, infrastructure, economic development, and all these things were very important for Indonesia's success and Jokowi's popularity and Jokowi's legitimacy. Does it mean that But at the same time, Prabowo has a more off the cuff temperamental style, which is very different from Joko Widodo, who's very quiet, who seems to try to read, pick, sort of air, and not really say outwardly kind of personality. So he also have a very nationalist bent and established international relationships. He's not shy away. He does not shy away from controversial topics. So for instance, he recently floated the peace initiative for the Russia-Ukraine war, and he seems to actually criticize the Russia in this case, and he criticized the West for palm oil export restrictions, and benefiting from their natural resources. And his administration could see an Indonesia that is more comfortable on the global stage. It's already, they're talking about Indonesia being part of OECD, although it might take a while, but they're still they're ambitious about it, more active on geopolitical issues, and more sensitive about sovereignty concerning, including in the South China Sea. So one of the concern is if Indonesia takes a side with the China in terms of South China Sea, what's going to happen? Because that's one of the hot potatoes in the region, and that could lead to bigger tensions, and it could create lots of sparks. So next, so I guess I will go to another next slide, please, and then go back to this slide. So if you look at select the event that tied to Indonesia, Russia, Ukraine war. So if you look at Indonesia, that not known to be, a diplomatic or a strong country, but Prabowo proposed a peace plan at a Shangri-La dialogue in June 2023, as when he was a defense minister, and Jokowi meets Zelensky at a G7 meeting on May 2023. He might be the only one that who's not coming from the very strong country, who's meeting leaders in ASEAN summit statement on the Indonesia's chairmanship ends with a designated paragraph on the Russia-Ukraine war, albeit without mentioning Russia. So that's May 2023. Russia's trade representative to Russia publicly hints at some local demand for Russian participation in energy projects. So they're trying to deal with both Russia and then Ukraine, try to end the war, and Russia and Indonesia signed extradition agreement in March 2023. Bali's governor suggests that amending visa policies amid cases of misbehavior and crimes primarily by business. Primarily by Russians. And then March 2023, there's the Indonesia Foreign Minister, Retno Marsudi, mentioned that restoring agricultural exports and seeking peace amid the Russian-Ukraine war in annual foreign policy speech. It's a January 2023. So you will see that even before Prabowo Subianto was the president of Indonesia, he was the minister of defense. He actually pushed a lot of these activities as a minister of defense. So we are expecting that there will be some sort of continuation in some sense from Jokowi, but also he's a lot more uh, ambitious, a lot more audacious in terms of foreign policy, so that maybe he will also depart from what has been practiced under the Jokowi's leadership. So if we go back to the previous slide that you showed earlier, so some of the opportunities could continue from ongoing follow-up work on the comprehensive strategic partnership that both ASEAN and United States actually signed on, that in November 2023, that they allow more private sector to exchange and make it easier for export and like trade and so forth. So there will be a mixed kind of result with the Prabowo's leadership. One thing I can say, what does U.S. need to do, or in order for U.S. to gain some benefit out of this relationship with Indonesia, is that most important thing is um, U.S. should engage Indonesia not as a proxy to fight against China or contain China, but as a country that it is equally interesting, equally fascinating, and potentially give a lot of benefits. It's one of the largest. It's a fourth largest country in the world, and most of the populations are very young. What that means is they will provide a lot of labor. They have also a lot of market. Their purchasing power is growing, and in Indonesia has the natural resources like nickel and other natural resources. So Indonesia will be a great place to engage. So if U.S. can see longer perspective for in terms of its benefit and engage Indonesia from now on, in the end, U.S. will benefit from the relationship pretty much. So I'll stop there and I'll have some questions from audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jung. If anyone has questions, and I'm going to take the slides out and bring myself back in. If anyone has any questions, please just type them into the comments section, and we will get to them, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. I have a question, which I'll
Sure.
start with. With the almost trade deficit that you addressed earlier, and how low the United States was in import export, it how much does that have to do with geography, and
Mm-hmm.
how much of it has to do with ideology?
Hmm. Like, well, I guess,
Because, like you pointed out, with military,
mm-hmm.
there is absolutely no problem.
Right.
With that. So what led to further trade between the two countries on other levels when the military
Mm-hmm.
is so high?
Right. So that's a good question. Why? Why would that be the case? I think in a way that China made a concessions, right? Like they say, we're gonna invest in your infrastructure. We're gonna build your speed train.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's a well, and also we're gonna bring our labor, but we're gonna they invest and then they get what they want. For United States, I don't think it's the ideology per se that runs it, but at the same time, United States some of the United States companies actually use Indonesia as a site for production, but they don't sell it there. They export out
Hmm.
to other countries. And so I guess the engagement on in Indonesia. So U.S. engagement in Indonesia, level of engagement is rather shallow than we expect. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, right, like uh, there was a newspaper article that U.S. wanted to sell arms, like tank or the fighter jets, and they couldn't sell it. And so, although as you see in the graph that the America's arms sales are higher than China's arms sale to Indonesia, that kind of arms sale does not spill over to the economic field.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to have some sort of more trade benefit or relationship, they should go beyond the arms sales. They should, invest, like they should have a more of foreign direct investment and, like have to sort of see what's been needed. There's a market analysis, what's needed, and so forth. But I guess Indonesia was never been targeted by United States as some sort of exciting destination for some reason.
Okay.
And often other specialists will point that our U.S.'s policy is driven by where the China goes, right? Like, so instead of making our own decisions and making our cultivating relationships, instead, like things are used to just show, like diplomacy is used to like contain or show kind of diplomacy against China. And when you do that kind of diplomacy, then the deepening the relationship between two countries might not happen, because it is Indonesia that they're interested. It's not that Indonesia they're interested in. It's more that they're using Indonesia as the way to get to China
Mm, mm-hmm.
or instigate China, and that might be an issue. But yes, geography is an issue. It's a much far, like further away. We have Latin America. We have all this like close relationship and so forth. But think about like they have a natural resources. They have a huge land, and people, the labor, available labor forces, and it's a fascinating country. Um, it's a fascinating country in terms of their culture, history. It is very interesting.
I could ask more questions, but we have a question, so I don't
Okay.
want to hog everything. Joellen was wondering, can the U.S. influence the deforestation for palm oil production that's going on?
Yeah, I think the palm oil production, right? The problem is that a lot of companies get in there, and with the permission of Indonesian government, um, they go in, and in order to gain, so what happens is the palm oil, we initially thought that, oh, it's a very nature friendly, it's a palm oil, how bad it can be. But what problem is, as you know, they burn the forest to plant the palm tree and to get the palm oil. And so they break the natural system. They break the like they displace the people, they displace the animal, and the wildfire and all these problems are coming out, right? Can the US influence? US has a lot of power. They will, with initially that I mean, U.S. can definitely, if they want, they can talk about, they bring it up in ASEAN plus and also APEC, or the convention, international, using the international convention to create the rule that slash and burn, like wildfire, can be deterred in somehow. But that cannot be done just by promising something. They will probably have to also have investment in some sense, that that countries no longer using that palm oil, but instead they should find a way, or they can restrict the exports of the palm oil, so that production cannot be overdriven and so forth. So yes, I would say there might be if all the countries sit down, especially without US, it's hard to be done. US, I feel like US underestimate the power. When you are in the US, I think US people underestimate the US power out overseas. And often we talk about US's power over like war zones and so forth. But US actually could do so many good things and have been doing good things as well, that we need US's role to make a rule that make the sustainable environmental situation for the people. So yeah, I didn't get to all these details like how, but I'm sure there are experts that who dealing with it. But when you make a rule, it's really important that the superpower countries that involved in it, if they are missing in the scene, as you know, it's hard to get implemented and hard to
Right.
get the people, you know, um, follow you. So involvement of countries like US is highly necessary. But if US ignores it, it's very unlikely that something could happen.
So why do you think Indonesia has flown under the radar of most Americans, and continues to do so. What what do you think is, because it sounds like if the U.S. invested just more in the cultural aspects of Indonesia and the history of
Hmm.
Indonesia and even the tourism aspect of Indonesia, it wouldn't be so invisible to most everyday Americans. And I'm not trying to be smug or anything. It
No,
just
no, no.
the
Yeah.
awareness of it seems to be so slight. Uh, why do you think that occurred, and how can that direction be changed?
It's funny because I think if you ask, like, have you been to Bali or do you know Bali? Everybody said yes. And then, or they know of Bali, right? And
Mm-hmm.
do you know where Bali located in? We have many people who don't know where Bali is. And Bali is in Indonesia, right? When
Right.
it's the Hindu. And I guess, I mean, I don't know why it is not as sort of I guess mixture of things that sort of, in a way, Thailand become much more familiar to US when a lot of US troops placed in Chiang Mai or some of the Thailand to provide the base for US soldiers fight against Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we are much more familiar with like Vietnam, like Thailand, and sort of mainland Southeast Asia, Philippines, because used to be U.S. colony, and there's a movement in the Philippines that want to be part of U.S.'s state, right? So it didn't work out, but they
Right.
they say that, oh, they want to be part of state, part of the state in United States. But Indonesia, I wonder, partly because it was Muslim country, the largest Muslim country, and there's a little bit of religious, like maybe the people are not familiar with it,
Mm-hmm.
with the religion. I mean, there's a geographical
Uh-oh.
products. Most coffees are from Sumatra, which is Indonesian coffee.
Dr.
And
Jung, could you repeat what you just said, because your screen froze
oh,
for
oh,
for
okay.
for for about 10 seconds, 10 to 15
Oh, okay.
seconds.
So,
I think it
so
was when you were starting to talk about exports, possibly.
yeah. So if you actually look at the like coffees and some of the items, like have you heard like Java coffee?
Sure.
It's coming from Java Island of Indonesia, right? And Sumatra coffee and all this, like some of the items that you see a lot in Indonesia, like Starbucks actually gets a huge coffee production from Indonesia. And even Timor Leste is no longer part of Indonesia, but they're also coming from they also supply to Starbucks as well. So that's and I guess, I mean, maybe we can turn your question around. I think that's a good question in a way. Why weren't we interested, we as a US like government wasn't interested in Indonesia much? And I guess that was because there are other countries that are interesting, like the rise of China, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they basically started the economic policy around 19, like they're started to picking up and become made in China syndrome started in basically around 1990s. Well,
Mm-hmm.
initially started with the 1980s, but 1990s, and still we call it China century. That there are a lot of foreign direct investment went in, so from 1990 all the way to early 2000, there were like China's like boom. So, that being said, now we are looking for, and China. is not same as before. And a lot of companies went away from China, like those manufacturing companies that who invested in China, who
Mm-hmm.
build the company, that now they're looking for even cheaper labor. And they went to Bangladesh, they went to Cambodia, there are other countries. But in order for countries to be the sort of destination for those industrial, like for cooperation, they should have combination of infrastructure, combination of like good system, like you're not too much of bureaucracy, and also they should have a labor and so forth. For Indonesia, I would say for a long time, they did not have much of infrastructure. Infrastructure was very low,
Okay.
and their natural resources, based on purely natural resources. And now I think things are different, right? Their government system, taxing system, and all these things, and they're willing to attract the foreign direct investment, and they have a good labor, better educated labor, and also they have a plenty of people. So I would say Indonesia is the one that rise. It took a long time to rise, but it will continue to rise over time. So if we look at it right now, might be still invisible, but if we look at future, like 5 years, 10 years, things might be really different. And how we wanna shape our future in 10 years, then maybe it's good to look at these countries and see um, what they do, how they do. This is a time for investment and to make allies before they can actually become too big that you cannot do anything about it.
Right. That was a great answer. Thank you very much. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask. Don't let me be the sole asker of questions because always have a lot of questions. My friends will attest to that, that it annoys them that I ask as many questions as I do. But do you think any of it is just based on um, generating an intelligent awareness of what compromises Indonesia? Because you're bringing up a lot of components,
Mm-hmm.
such as for the coffee, for with Bali. Um, do you think there's just, I hate to say an ignorance, but just an ignorance that those are components of what creates the total? Whereas everyone knows that Georgia is a state in the United States, or
Mm-hmm.
even Delaware. Small things. There's an awareness, whereas people don't have the awareness that these are components of Indonesia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we're so used to looking at individual things, but not looking at the whole big picture. So there might be also reason why that we might not know. But to me, Indonesia was really fascinating. When I first went, I was like, maybe I was like 22 or something, like, and it was, you know, combination of 1970, 60 look like houses, but at the same time, there's like high rises, and there's like practices that you will see. They're like a modern and tradition coexist in
Hmm.
a way that right next to each other in a stark difference, but people are very open to new things. So like the I think the largest like TikTok user coming from Indonesia, like Indonesia has the largest number of TikTok users, or used to be that I think Facebook as well.
Okay.
And they like I think there are a lot of innovations happen in those countries that we don't get to know because we already have it. And but like they do have a like a Uber, something equivalent to Uber there, like Grab, right? Like so they have their own system to run it, but they're not afraid of adopting or learning from other countries. And people are open-minded about all this technology, not really nationalistic about it, but learn from it and make it better. And so I think that's the really one of the great strength. And they're yeah, no, I think that's a great strength and a lot more potential. I know many people say, well, Indonesia has been had a potential for a long time, and still we are talking about potential, but it does have a and it takes a long time for potential to come true, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. Oh, if I may, you said you were an exchange student when you first, um, you know, became
Yes.
fascinated with the culture. What was it that drew you to Indonesia to become an exchange student there?
Um, Well, good question. Thanks for asking. In a way, I grew up in Korea that everything is so modern, everything is so competition driven. I feel like diversity isn't something wasn't the value that our society, Korean society, was really based on. Um, and diversity wasn't. It's not like despised, but it was just like forgotten. And when I actually join a student conference that are hosted in our campus, I get to meet students from different countries in ASEAN countries. And I learned that it's fascinatingly different. These students are different, how they, view things are different. And I thought maybe this is the time that I should learn other than American views, other than European perspective, not only the strong countries perspective, but learn from how developing countries, back then developing
Hmm.
countries actually see things. And to me, that was the most important point, that I want to learn from the people who live in not necessarily affluent countries, and how they view development, how they view changes, how they view their future. And I think that sort of motivated me to go to Indonesia, and that was eye-opening. That what I thought as so commonsensical, what I thought as like, like, of course that's how it should be. Of course America's, like all this US centered or Europe centered or Western centered uh things are not necessarily, you know, um the view that we should take, right? So I think it was the eye-opening experience, and I stayed there for 6 months, like one semester, and then when I came back, I could not forget about it. I was so fascinated by
Hopefully, there will be an unfreezing soon.
Oh, is it freezing again?
It froze again, but it started when you came back. You couldn't stop thinking,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's when it froze.
Okay. Yeah. So that's, yeah. So I think what drives them, and try to look at it from their perspective. And I thought that was very interesting, because we don't really think about what the weaks the weaker people's perspective in terms
Hmm.
of, like, their economic differences.
Well, thank you for that. For your answer. I love that answer. I was an exchange student. I didn't go anywhere nearly as interesting. I did ask to go to Japan, and they sent me to Belgium. I was an AFS
That's
student,
great.
so it was great. And it really is eye-opening to go somewhere that isn't where you grew up, and you see the world through different sets of eyes. And it's probably the most important thing I ever did. I know
Mm-hmm.
Belgium isn't that terribly exotic compared to, I mean, the United States even. There's a town named Belgium in Wisconsin. So I mean, it's fairly similar, but it was such a cultural awakening for me when I went. So I love hearing your answer and how very dissimilar situations. I was a bit younger too because I went in high school. I was there
Oh,
for
okay.
I went for a full year though, and I loved it. I liked that there were similarities in our stories, even though very different geographic locations where we went to. So
Right, right.
well, we're coming up against time. I don't have any other questions coming in. I'm going to put a plug in quickly
Okay.
for next week's Great Decisions. If anyone has a question, please don't hesitate to ask because we still have a little bit of time. But next week is our last week of Great Decisions for 2024, and we will be looking at the High Seas Treaty with Professor Elizabeth Wheat, who is at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. She will be our lecturer next week. That will be our combination. That is a hybrid version of Great Decisions for the last week. In-room at the Balkansky, in-room at the Balkansky Community Room. If you can make it into the library next week. If you can't make it in, tune into either our Facebook page or our YouTube channel like tonight. And you can watch it live. And if you have any questions, then or now, while you still have a couple minutes, you can still get a question if you'd like. Next week at 6 o'clock is our last week for this year. So it doesn't appear as if any questions are coming in, but thank you so much, Dr. Jung, for being here.
Thank
Fascinating
you.
lecture, very informative. I have to admit that, I'm as ignorant as the majority of people about Indonesia and the role it plays in ASEAN and the whole Asian sphere. So thank you so much for bringing us all this great information.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, it was wonderful. Have a great night. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
everyone who tuned in, and we will see you next week. Thank you for being here, Dr. Jung.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.